The rain hammered against the wide glass windows of Murphy's diner like 1,000 small fists, each drop carrying the weight of the sky's grief. Outside, the street glistened in silver and charcoal, reflections of passing headlights smearing across the puddled pavement. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of coffee and frying onions. But even that comfort couldn't reach the corner booth where Robert Harrison sat, shoulders hunched, head bowed, as if trying to fold himself into the smallest possible space. 3 weeks. 21 days since the phone call had ripped his world apart. 21 mornings he woke in the silence where laughter once lived. 21 nights staring at the empty space in the hallway, where his daughter's backpack used to hang. The world kept moving, but Robert had stopped. The CEO of Harrison Industries, worth more than most people could imagine, looked nothing like the man who once commanded boardrooms with quiet authority. His silver hair was disheveled, rain still dripping from the ends. The navy suit, tailored in London, clung to him in damp folds, its fine wool darkened from the storm. In his right hand, he held a small pink bracelet. The cheap plastic beads spelled Dad in blocky letters, the elastic worn thin. Sarah had made it for him the week before her 8th birthday, just days before a drunk driver had ended her life. He hadn't let go of it since. The coffee in front of him had gone cold. He didn't notice. His eyes were fixed on the bracelet, as though it were the last thread keeping him tethered to a world that no longer made sense. A shadow fell across the table. "Mister, are you okay?" The voice was small, high, uncertain, but with a steadiness that caught him off guard. Robert looked up. Standing there was a girl, no older than Sarah had been, with mousy brown hair tied back in a lopsided ponytail. Her jeans were frayed at the knees, her sweater the sizes too big, and her sneakers were patched with duct tape at the seams. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, head tilted, studying him with a seriousness far beyond her years. His voice broke. He swallowed. "Try it again." "I'm fine. You look really sad," she said, and without waiting for permission, slid into the booth across from him. "My mama says when people look that sad, they need a friend." Across the diner, a woman in a faded waitress uniform straightened up from wiping the counter. "Emma," she called gently, her voice carrying the weight of someone always tired. "Leave the gentleman alone, sweetheart." "It's all right," Robert said quickly, surprising himself. Something about the girl's eyes, clear, earnest, without a hint of pity, made it impossible to send her away. She glanced at the unopened menu in front of him. "Are you hungry? Food makes things a little better. That's what Mama says." He reached automatically for his wallet. His jacket pocket was empty. He checked the others, then the inside of his coat. Nothing. The panic was ridiculous. He could buy the diner 10 times over. But right now, in this moment, the absence of his wallet felt like the last cruel nudge toward collapse. "I seem to have lost." "I'll pay for your lunch," Emma interrupted matter-of-factly. Digging into her pocket, she pulled out a crumpled $5 bill and a few quarters, flattening them carefully on the table. "This is my allowance. But Mama says helping people is more important than buying stuff for yourself." Robert stared at the little pile of coins and bills, at the hands that had offered it so simply. Her nails were uneven, her knuckles slightly chapped. He thought of Sarah's small hands, the way they dug at his when she wanted him to notice something important. "I can't take your money, sweetheart," he whispered. "Please," she said, her voice soft but determined. "My daddy went to heaven when I was 5. I remember how sad Mama was. Nobody should eat alone when they're that sad." The words hit him like a blow, cracking something deep in his chest. He couldn't speak, so he just nodded. "Order whatever you want," Emma said, smiling with a brightness that seemed to push back the rain outside. "I'll sit with you so you're not alone." And as Robert looked into those kind, unwavering eyes, he felt for the first time in 3 weeks a small, fragile stir of something he thought had died with Sarah. Hope. The storm had eased by the time Robert stepped out of Murphy's diner, but the streets still gleamed under the dull glow of the street lamps, their wet surfaces catching the light like sheets of black glass. He should have gone home, back to the echoing silence of his mansion, but his feet moved on their own, across the street, just far enough to blend into the shadows. He caught sight of her again. Emma was walking beside the tired waitress, her mother. No doubt her small hand wrapped tightly around Grace's. They didn't have umbrellas. Instead, they hunched forward against the damp air, their steps quick but careful on the slick pavement. Something in him, curiosity, desperation, maybe both, pushed him to follow. He stayed well back, letting the occasional car pass between them. His polished shoes silent against the soaked sidewalk. They turned down Maple Street, a stretch he'd never had reason to visit, lined with shuttered shops, peeling billboards, and rusting street signs. The further they walked, the darker it became, until a single flickering lamp lit the entrance to a gravel road. They passed under a sagging sign, Sunset Trailer Park. The place was quiet except for the sound of the wind, rattling loose sheets of tin. The mobile homes were weathered and dented, each one bearing the marks of time-crooked porch steps. Patched siding, sagging roofs, but here and there, Robert noticed stubborn bursts of color, a hanging basket of marigolds, a row of potted plants, in mismatched containers, a child's bike leaning against a railing. Life, fighting to hold its place. Grace and Emma stopped at number 47, a narrow trailer with faded aluminum siding, a crooked wooden porch, and the small flower boxes brimming with pink and yellow blooms. Even in the dim light, it looked like someone had tried to make it beautiful. Grace unlocked the door, and the warm glow of the inside spilled out, illuminating the little girl's face as she skipped up the steps. Robert's car, sleek, black, and wholly out of place here, was parked half a block away behind a cluster of oaks. He slid into the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine. Instead, he sat there in the dark, listening to the muted sound of Emma's voice drifting through the thin walls. "You gave him your allowance money." Grace's voice carried a note of gentle reprimand. "He needed it more, Mama." Emma answered without hesitation. "His eyes looked just like yours did when Daddy died." Robert's breath caught. That single sentence delivered so simply, without pity, cut through the numbness that had gripped him for weeks. He could almost see her, speaking with the same clear-eyed certainty Sarah once had when she thought she understood the world better than the grown-ups around her. The glow from their living room window pulsed softly against the dark, and Robert found himself thinking that this tiny pocket of life was more real than any boardroom, more honest than any deal he'd ever signed. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Margaret, his assistant, had sent a string of messages about urgent meetings, investment calls, contracts waiting for his approval. He stared at the screen until the light dimmed and went out. For the first time in years, none of it mattered. As he sat there watching the silhouette of a girl who had given him everything she had without expecting anything in return, Robert made a silent promise. He would find out who they were. He would know their struggles, their dreams, and their needs. He would help them quietly, carefully, without ever letting them feel like a charity case. But most of all, he would find a way to thank her for something she didn't even realize she'd done, breathing life back into a man who had been certain he was already gone. The morning after Robert followed Emma and Grace home, the sun rose pale and thin, struggling to burn through the fog that clung to the streets. Robert hadn't slept. The image of their little trailer with its crooked porch and defiant blooms kept pulling him back from the edge of sleep. He sat at the edge of his bed, still in yesterday's clothes, staring at the bracelet on his palm. The elastic had stretched with time. One bead was cracked. He thought of Sarah's small hands threading them together, her tongue poking out in concentration. She had always been making something for someone, a picture, a card, a flower crown she'd insist he wear in the backyard. By the time he finally moved, it wasn't toward the office, but toward the city's less traveled roads, the kind of neighborhoods his chauffeured car used to speed past without slowing. He parked 2 blocks from the diner and walked, collar up against the wind. Murphy's looked different in daylight, more worn, the paint fading, the window glass slightly warped from years of weather. He slipped inside, scanning for Grace. She was behind the counter, hair pulled into a loose bun, face pale under the fluorescent lights. A bruise bloomed faintly along her forearm where the cuff of her sleeve had slipped. Robert noticed her smile to each customer was polite, but never quite reached her eyes. When she saw him, she hesitated. "Coffee?" she asked, voice cautious, as if unsure why he was here again. He nodded. "And whatever your daughter usually gets. To go." Grace blinked at him, surprised. "Emma, she's at school. Then she'll have something nice waiting when she gets home," he said simply. Her expression softened for a second, then hardened again, guarded. "She doesn't need." "I know," Robert interrupted gently, "but I do." The silence stretched between them before she turned away to pour the coffee. He could feel her unease. People in her world had learned that help always came with a price. While she moved to the kitchen, Robert took out his phone and sent a brief message to Margaret. "Find everything you can about Grace and Emma," discreetly, and about Sunset Trailer Park. Priority. Hours later, the report landed in his inbox. The words were clinical, but heavy. Grace Whitfield, 32, widowed, husband killed in a construction site collapse 3 years ago, outstanding medical debt, $27,000. Employment, Murphy's Diner, 2 shifts a day. Emma Whitfield, 8, 3rd grade. Average grades, loves art. Sunset Trailer Park, land owned by Harrison Industries subsidiary. Scheduled for redevelopment luxury apartments, demolition date set in 6 months. The air seemed to thicken around him as he read. It wasn't just that the girl who had given him her last $5 was living on borrowed ground, it was that he was the one borrowing it from her without even knowing. He sat back in his chair, the truth settling in like a cold weight. The very machine he had built, the empire he had spent decades feeding, was already rolling toward their home, and stopping it would mean going to war with the bored men who would not hesitate to bury him for standing in their way. But when he closed his eyes, all he saw was Emma's face under the flickering diner lights, offering him every cent she had with the solemn courage of someone who had already lost too much. He realized then that he wasn't deciding whether to get involved. He already was. That night, the city glowed like molten gold on the horizon, but Robert didn't see it. He was pacing the length of his study, the room's walls lined with shelves of unread books and framed awards from a life that felt foreign now. The bracelet lay on his desk beside a manila folder. Margaret's full report on Grace and Emma. The logical part of him, the part that had built Harrison Industries from nothing, told him to forget it. These weren't his problems. He had a board to answer to, investors to placate, a reputation to protect, but logic had been losing ground to something else lately, something raw, restless, and entirely irrational. By morning, he'd made his decision. His first step was quiet and unseen, a transfer of funds into a local charity that specialized in school grants for low-income children. The note in the file was brief. For Emma Whitfield, full academic support, no disclosure. It wasn't enough. Days later, he returned to Murphy's under the pretense of happening to be in the neighborhood. Emma bounded up to greet him, her excitement genuine, unguarded. Grace, though polite, still kept her distance, suspicion lingering in her eyes. "You like spaghetti?" Emma asked him that afternoon, swinging her legs under the booth. "I do," he said, smiling faintly. "Mama makes the best. You should come over sometime." She said it as if inviting him into a palace, not a sagging trailer. Grace stiffened, but Robert didn't miss the flicker of pride in her gaze. "We don't have much," she said, "but we do okay." "I'd be honored," Robert replied. He showed up 2 nights later with a grocery bag heavy with fresh pasta, tomatoes, and herbs, ingredients far better than the ones Grace usually had to work with. She tried to refuse, but Emma's excitement overrode her protests. Dinner was cramped but warm. The table wobbled on one leg, the plates didn't match, and the sauce bubbled in a dented pan. But for the first time in years, Robert felt like he belonged somewhere. He told them about Sarah, not everything, just enough for Emma to understand why he carried the bracelet. She listened wide-eyed, then slid off her chair to hug him. "I bet she's happy you found us," she said. Robert swallowed hard. Grace's eyes shimmered, though she said nothing. Later that week, Emma came down with a bad cough that worsened overnight. Grace called it sick to work, terrified she'd lose the day's wages. By the time Robert heard, Emma was in the struggling to breathe. He was there in under 30 minutes, signing forms, covering every bill without hesitation. Grace's gratitude was quiet, but fierce. "I don't know why you're doing this," she murmured, "but thank you." He didn't answer, because the truth, the awful, heavy truth, was that he was doing it to save something of himself. But each kindness, each moment with them, only tangled him further in the net of his own making, because the clock was ticking. 6 months until demolition, and he still hadn't told them that the man who tucked a blanket around Emma in the hospital chair was also the man whose company would soon take away their home. The folding chairs were arranged in neat, tense rows, the air in the Sunset Trailer Park community hall thick with the smell of burnt coffee and damp coats. Outside, dusk was settling fast, the pale light casting long shadows across the gravel lot. Inside, every conversation was a low hum of worry. Robert stood in the back, collar turned up, hands in his coat pockets, feeling the uneasy throb of guilt rise with each passing second. He wasn't supposed to be here. He told himself he was coming just to understand the process. But deep down he knew he was here to see their faces, to feel the weight of what his company was about to do. The meeting started with a man in a crisp navy suit, one of Harrison Industries' project managers, stepping up to the podium. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, the kind of tone meant to soothe while it cut. We're proud to announce the redevelopment of Sunset Trailer Park into the new Sunset Heights luxury residences. This project will... The room erupted. Voices rose in angry bursts. Where are we supposed to go? You can't just throw us out. We've been here 20 years. Robert's eyes found Grace near the front, Emma sitting on her lap, her small hands twisting nervously. In her mother's sweater, Grace's jaw was tight. Her eyes locked on the man at the podium like she could burn holes through him. Then came the slide, the one Robert had dreaded since the moment he read the report. The projector screen lit up with an image from last year's groundbreaking ceremony. For another Harrison project, Robert himself, standing with a gold shovel in hand, smiling for the cameras. The caption was clear: Robert Harrison, CEO, Harrison Industries. It took a heartbeat for the recognition to register in Grace's face. Her head snapped around toward the back of the room, eyes locking with his across the crowd. The betrayal there was raw, jagged, and it hit him harder than he'd braced for. She stood without a word, Emma clinging to her side, and pushed through the crowd toward the exit. Robert moved instinctively, following her out into the cold. Grace, she spun on him, eyes wet, but voice steady enough to cut. You knew. All this time you knew. I didn't at first. Not until you wormed your way into my daughter's life. Into mine. Paid for dinners, hospital bills, groceries, what? To make yourself feel better before you bulldozed our home. It's not like that, he said, but the words felt brittle, empty in the chill night air. Emma's voice was small, but sharp. You're not our friend. Robert's throat closed. He reached for something, anything, but Grace pulled Emma close, stepping back. Stay away from us, Grace said, her voice breaking. If you have even a shred of the decency you pretend to, you'll leave us alone. She turned and walked away into the shadows, Emma's hand tight in hers, without looking back. Robert stood there long after they were gone, the community hall still buzzing behind him, the wind biting at his face. Somewhere deep inside, something ugly and familiar stirred the ruthless part of himself that the board loved. But for the first time in years, he didn't want that part to win. Rain blurred the glass walls of Harrison Industries' top-floor boardroom, streaking the city skyline in smudges of gray and gold. Robert sat at the head of the long mahogany table, the leather chair beneath him feeling less like a seat of power and more like a trap. The other directors were filing in sharp suits, sharper smiles, each one carrying the scent of money and the unspoken knowledge that the man at the head of the table was about to be cornered. Before we begin, said Gerald Kessler, CFO and Robert's oldest rival, I think we should address the matter of Sunset Heights. The press packet is ready, construction crews are booked, and the mayor's office is expecting a ribbon-cutting date. His tone was smooth, but Robert heard the challenge in it. Don't you dare slow this down. Robert's fingers closed around the pink bracelet in his pocket. He saw Grace's face in his mind tight with fury, and Emma's small voice asking if he was still their friend. He set his jaw. The demolition's on hold. The room went still. The hum of the HVAC loud in the silence. On hold, Kessler leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Robert, we've sunk millions into this project. The investors can wait. Robert interrupted. His voice was calm, but edged with steel. We're going to review relocation options for the residents. Real ones, not a bus ticket and a pat on the back. A murmur swept through the table. One of the younger directors shifted uncomfortably. With respect, Robert, Harrison Industries isn't in the charity business. Robert's eyes snapped to him. We're in the people business. We just forgot it. Kessler gave a humorless laugh. This is about that widow and her kid, isn't it? The ones you've been playing benefactor to. You think that makes you noble? All it's doing is making you weak, and weakness costs. Robert didn't blink. What costs is pretending that building towers makes us immoral. All it makes us is rich and hollow. That did it. The board smelled blood. Questions came sharp and fast about fiduciary duty, about lost timelines, about shareholder revolts. Robert parried each one, but he could feel the walls closing in. Kessler was already working the angles, framing Robert's decision as reckless, sentimental, dangerous. Finally, Kessler leaned back, smug. If you want to stall the project, you need a majority vote, and I don't think you have it. Robert looked around the table, reading each face like a battlefield map. He didn't have the votes yet, but he had something else. Fine, he said evenly. Let's vote next week. That gives me 7 days to make you see why saving Sunset is the only move worth making. He stood before anyone could argue, leaving the bracelet on the table in front of him. It was a silent declaration. This is war. As the elevator doors closed around him. Robert knew the fight wasn't just for Grace and Emma anymore, it was for the part of himself that Sarah would have recognized. And if the board wanted a war, they were going to get one. The week leading up to the board vote was a war fought in silence. Robert moved like a man with two shadows, one cast by the skyline of power he had built, and the other by the little trailer in Sunset Park, where a mother and daughter still wouldn't answer his calls. He didn't waste time trying to sway the board with platitudes. Instead, he hunted leverage. Over late-night coffees and dingy hotel bars, he met with city inspectors, housing advocates, and even a disgraced former Harrison project manager who had nothing left to lose. Every conversation added a weapon to his arsenal: zoning violations, quietly ignored, inflated construction costs hidden in miscellaneous budgets, and a paper trail leading to Kessler's private real estate fund one that stood to make millions off the redevelopment. By Thursday, Robert had something that could not just win the vote, but burn the boardroom to ash. But there was one move left, and it meant going to Grace. He found her at Murphy's after closing, mopping the floor in the half-dark. She didn't look up when the bell over the door chimed. "I told you to stay away," she said, her voice flat. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," Robert replied, stepping closer. "I'm here because in 3 days, your home either stands or it falls, and I can't do it without you." She stilled, mop handle in hand. "Why should I help you?" "Because this isn't about me anymore. It's about every family in that park. I can't be their voice without you." Her gaze lifted then, wary but searching. "And if I say no, then they lose, and you'll have to explain to Emma why the man who could have stopped it didn't." Something in her broke not trust, but the icy wall she'd built between them. She nodded once. On the day of the vote, the boardroom was a cage full of predators waiting to tear into him. Kessler sat across the table, confidence dripping from his smirk. Robert didn't start with numbers. He started with a video. The lights dimmed, and the screen filled with footage Grace had helped him collect. Residents telling their stories. Children showing the rooms they'd painted themselves. The elderly man who had built his porch with his own hands 40 years ago. Then came the hard evidence, Robert's voice steady as he laid out the hidden costs, the falsified reports, and finally, the financial documents linking Kessler to a shadow company set to buy the land. After demolition, gasps cut through the room. Kessler went pale. "This," Robert said, voice low, "is not redevelopment. It's theft. And if you vote to proceed, you own every piece of it." Silence. Then, one by one, the votes fell in his favor. The demolition was halted. Afterward, Robert left without fanfare. Grace was waiting outside the building. Emma at her side. The girl ran to him, her arms tied around his waist. "You kept your promise," she whispered. He looked over her head at Grace, who met his eyes with something softer than before, but still guarded. He understood. Trust wasn't a switch. It was a seed, and maybe, just maybe, it would grow.